At what point does artifice start and real history stop? And at what point does something which appears to be true become something that can be exposed as fake or fraudulent? T.E. Lawrence's The Mint, for example. My mother had a copy, and I devoured it. I thought it was very exciting, as I also devoured bizarrely the Five Pillars of Wisdom, which is a long and rather complex book, and not a terribly good book. But The Mint is not a fake memoir in the usual sense of a fabrication or hoax. It's a highly stylized, selective, and partly censored autobiographical account of his time in the Royal Air Force. And Lawrence was quite honest about changing names and compressing details for privacy and narrative effect. But it was not a fraudulent attempt in that sense to deceive readers about his identity or his experiences. So The Mint is better described as an artful, partial, and self-conscious fabrication, but not a fake. If you want real autobiographies or memoirs that have been incredibly exposed as fake or fraudulent, they are rarer, but some examples do exist, like Go Ask Alice, which is often marketed as the real diary of an anonymous American teenager on drugs. The Hitler Diaries, of course, in 1983, sold to the Sunday Times as a genuine autobiographical diaries of Adolf Hitler. They were, in fact, a modern forgery by a man called Conrad. And while not technically a memoir in the author's own words, they were represented as such, and Rupert Murdoch famously ordered them published, causing scandal. And there's a thing by a Polish-American writer called Rosenblatt, Angel at the Fence, which is a fraudulent Holocaust memoir, and it was promoted in the UK before it was cancelled in the US. Several UK publishers and newspapers covered it as true before it was exposed. Margaret Seltzer, again, it was published in the UK and then revealed to be fabricated, and the UK publishers were forced to cancel it. There's another one by Anthony Godby Johnson, a memoir of an HIV positive abused boy, revealed to be a hoax by Vicky Johnson, and created by Vicky Johnson, and the UK publishers distributed it for a while as a true memoir. The Mint, we go back to the Mint because I think that's the standard. Is not an example of fraud in the way that, say, James Frey or Vilkomisky were. The UK has fewer homegrown cases of outright fake autobiographies, but it certainly imported and promoted some very bizarre stories. And so we come to The Salt Path, which I don't know what we're supposed to make of this scandal and what it means. The Observer this morning has drawn parallels between The Salt Path and the story of Captain Tom, and the way Captain Tom's prodigious walk was cheapened and exploited by his family. Raina Wynn's Salt Path is sold as a memoir of catastrophic personal loss, homelessness after being defrauded, and a redemptive pilgrimage undertaken in the shadow of Moth's supposedly terminal brain disease. And the Observer investigation alleges first that Wynne, her legal name is Sally Walker, was not ruined by a bad investment in a friend's business, but had to repay £64,000 that she'd allegedly embezzled from an employer and a neighbour secured against her home. And she and her husband owned a property in France while claiming destitution, apparently. And Moth's illness, which was portrayed in both the book and in the film with Jeremy Isaacs, and if you've seen Jeremy Isaacs in the White Lotus, you realize what a tremendous actor he is, and what sincerity and authenticity he brings to a part. Moth's illness was portrayed as terminal, but was atypical and mild, and there's no clinical support, apparently, for the idea that hiking reversed it. So Wynne admits that the settlement with her former employer um, was I think she admits that it was genuine, and that it was during a period which she calls a pressured time with mistakes, though she denies any fraud, and she says the French property was uninhabitable. And I've seen photographs of that, and that certainly seems to be the case. She insists Moth's CBD diagnosis was real and that walking helped his health, but she denies ever claiming it cured him. The Penguin, Michael Joseph, her publisher, relied on author warranties and legal reads to protect themselves from libel, not to verify the truth of the underlying story. And the industry norm is that memoirists are trusted to tell the truth. A memoir, this is a central problem, because a memoir rests on a contract of trust between the author and the reader. Unlike fiction, it promises truth, fallible, substantive truth, certainly, but a good faith effort, and The Salt Path sold millions precisely. It was billed as unflinchingly honest. It was an account of real adversity. Readers were moved not by the literary quality alone, but by the moral capital of its truth. So if the Observer allegations are correct, then this was a calculated misrepresentation, not an embellishment, not selective omission, but a rewriting of culpability into victimhood. And the most damning accusation, to my mind, is about Moth's CBD. And neurologists say it's implausible for his disease to be so mild for so long, or to be reversed by walking. And even Wynn's published medical letters describe it as very mild and atypical. And yet she wrote scenes of dramatic improvement thanks to hiking. And this matters profoundly. It sold false hope to people with incurable degenerative conditions. And equally troubling is her portrayal of the loss of her home as an act of betrayal by a friend. And the Observer's reporter indicates that the loan that cost them their home was specifically secured to pay off the settlement of her alleged embezzlement. And this reframes the story from tragic injustice to tragic consequence. And here is where my view grows harsher, I'm afraid. Memoirs are big business, and publishers want clean, uplifting arcs, and this is the industry's dirty secret. Fact-checking is minimal. Sales departments adore neat, redemptive stories that sell well in book clubs and get film rights. And Wynn's publisher banked on a middle-class fantasy of hardship overcome through the cleansing power of nature. And the risk that it was partly fabricated was accepted, wittingly or not, in the pursuit of profit. So one sharp point in the coverage is fair. The public wanted this. We want adversity that flatters us with empathy while offering no genuine challenge. We want the wilderness as moral cure without confronting the real brutality of poverty or terminal illness. And the scandal exposes an industry failure, contractual warranties that authors are not sufficient protection for readers, and fact-checking is not routine. Even a disclaimer that some details have been changed is a fig leaf, isn't it? There's no professional code akin to journalism's editorial standards, and there should be. The genre is damaged when publishers sell fiction as fact. And if half of the Observer's reporting holds, The Salt Path cannot be treated as a trustworthy memoir. It's merely embroidered or structured. It's not simply that. It's a misrepresentation of fundamental truths. And Wynn and her publisher may choose to continue to sell it, but they will do so under cloud of justified suspicion. And the ethical course must be to reclassify it, at the very least, with an honest preface acknowledging the complexities, the legal disputes, and the truth about Moth's diagnosis. It doesn't make it any less of a good story, but it makes it less factual. And Michael Joseph, in my view, owes readers an apology for branding the book unflinchingly honest, without checking to see whether or not it was even minimally honest. The Salt Path is no longer a credible work of memoir in its current form. It's literature, certainly, and it must be read with the same caution that one brings to historical fiction that purports to be based on a true story. And if the publishing industry wishes to preserve readers' trust in memoir as a genre, it must do better than this. Um, and I think when you're writing a memoir, I started doing one in a hospital bed while I was suffering from cancer and thinking that I was going to die. Um, and out of 12 chapters, I got to chapter 7. And it made me think, you know, that there are things that, that maybe shouldn't be revealed, and there are things that maybe should, and there are stories that, you know, you tell and you think, actually, this should have a wider audience because it's important. And I wrote my memoir really to explain why I ended up on a reality TV show. But as I was writing, I realized there were much bigger questions um, about whether or not the reality TV show and the stress of that contributed to the growth of my cancer. I'd said in a newspaper article, I think for the Independent, that the 18 months following the TV show were months of such stress. It made even being held at gunpoint, which has happened to me on a few occasions, seem quite mild. And then within a few weeks of that newspaper article going up, I hemorrhaged badly. I was unfortunately wearing yellow trousers, which didn't help. And I went to the hospital, and I was quite quickly diagnosed with cancer. A colonoscopy revealed that it was a T4, which I think is quite serious. A slightly amusing story at the time. I was lying on a bed after this hemorrhaging, after this emergency, and a doctor sidled up to me one way and pulled down my trousers. And a nurse came up the other way to my head, and she said, "Oh, are you? I think it was a present tense. Are you or were you? Were you Professor Tim in the circle?" And I said yes, and the doctor said, "That's just my finger." And I approached the whole thing with a sort of I hope lightness of touch. I didn't want to labour it all too much, but I have been involved in a number of interesting stories, and I thought collect them all, explain why I joined UKIP, what I hoped to find. I thought UKIP was probably one of the more important political movements of its day. And yes, I certainly feigned ignorance to get my foot in the door. And I was very flattered to be asked to stand first as a councillor and then as a candidate for the House of Commons. And I thought to myself, well, if the structure is so weak as it appeared to be, then it's something I can perhaps take over. And I certainly believed, and I still believe, that Europe is an institution badly in need of restructuring. But I am a committed European, and I was very much aware of that at the time. And I found myself twisted into chop logic sometimes in the things that I was required to say. But I wanted to see most importantly whether or not the rumours were true that UKIP was a racist organisation, and I found that it really wasn't for the most part. That the people who had joined it were mostly disgruntled Tories, and they were very genial and very charming. Some of them are still good friends, but up at the top, which was something I could only access by becoming a candidate for Parliament. Up at the top, it was quite clear. The bald-headed ubiquity of the ex-National Front lads was undeniable. I'm not surprised at all that when Farage ran in Thanet, his campaign manager had got a background in the National Front. It was all over the place. They weren't in the front office, they weren't immediately seen, but they were certainly there. And BMP and all these other links were there. And so when a fellow called Coburn, who was an MEP, made a dismissive joke to Humza Yousaf, or about Humza Yousaf, on air, publicly. It seemed to me perfectly reasonable that this was an evidence of the racism that lies at the heart of, or in the brain of, UKIP. And I called it out, and Humza said, let's go big. I wasn't at all prepared for what that meant. And I was very worried about getting a brick thrown through the window by these thugs that dominated UKIP, and some of them took me on, thankfully only verbally. And I remember particularly waiting in a BBC studio, and Farage saying, "Well, it's just a joke. Can't you take a joke?" And I'd worked out that I could say something. I'd spent so long waiting. I'd worked out that I could say something slightly naughty, and if I kept a straight face, I would probably that would probably be it. And I said, "Well, it's not something you can toss off over a pint of beer." And that became the quote in I think the Daily Mail. I think it was just the Daily Mail. I don't remember whether other newspapers. I think there probably were. And I thought, that's also another story that I can tell. And while I was in UKIP, I saw a level of electoral corruption, which, of course, I reported, and nothing happened. Because these systems aren't set up to do anything. They're set up only to make a fuss if somebody loses. And if nobody loses, nobody cares. And I found that in itself rather disturbing. And I enjoy politics. I enjoy the cut and thrust of politics, and I've learned a great deal. And this was at a time when I was also working in Russia, and I was balancing the UKIP stuff with my time in Russia, and I was very worried that it would all sort of get mixed up, and it didn't. I was very lucky. And yes, and I also thought it was important to talk about cancer. And I've never finished it. So unlike, what's her name, Wynne, I've not finished my memoir, and maybe one day, if I have any time. But I find I make videos. I make about 14 videos a day, which I squeeze in between doing lessons and animating. I'm making a little animated film, a 2D animated film, which requires a lot of work. I'm making 3, actually. 2 of them are tests to see if it works. And in the process, I'm doing things which 2D animation is not supposed to do. I'm moving the camera, and I'm very mindful of a person I regard as my mentor. I met him when I was 11 years old, and he was very keen on a flexible camera. So I do that. I do my YouTube videos. I teach about 20, 25, sometimes 30 hours a week, and I'm also writing a book. So I have a very full life. I don't. I find the only way I can do it is by switching off from one job and switching on wholeheartedly on to another. And I took my lesson from my cats, who sadly both of them have now died. And I would like another cat very much, because I found I learnt a lot from the cats about how to live in the moment, because we are so obsessed with living in the past or living in the future. And living in the past or the future, you tend not to be able to get on with the present. I like to think I can get on with the present, but sometimes schlepping backwards and forwards across London, or pottering around the place with suitcases is not my idea of a present. There we are. And yesterday, for example, I was exhausted. I had to go off to a theatre show in Greenwich and do a Q&A, which was lovely. And the show was delightful. It's called Reality Bites. If you get an opportunity to go to Greenwich, to the Archers Lane Theatre, go there. And it's only an hour. It's tremendous fun, beautifully written, beautifully performed. And so I was talking about reality TV. And again, something I never thought for 1 minute I would be involved with. But to find out more of the details about that, you will have to read the memoir, if and when I get it finished.